Hey everybody, welcome once again to the Undiscovered Games video podcast where we take a look at the lesser known board games of the world and share those with you. Today's episode is going to be a little weird. It's a wonky, weird game by the great Andreas Steding. The game is called Power and Weakness, otherwise known as Macht Ohnmacht. Now this is a two-player only game and it's area control, and you don't see a lot of two-player only area control games, and that's what originally drew me to this game. And also, the designer, Andreas Steding, he designed my favorite game of all time right now, which is Hansa Teutonica. Now, Power and Weakness is nothing like Hansa Teutonica, so I don't want to compare them, but it definitely lacks that game's elegance. It's a little bit rules heavy. As you'll see, the rule book is a bit long for a game like this, but it is very well written and very well laid out. You just have to read every single word in the rule book. You have to read it over a few times. It has a lot of these like situational rules, if this, then this, or if you do this, you have to check that, and if that's this, then you got to do this. There's a lot of stuff like that to remember in this game. I don't typically like that in board games. However, it's not too bad, and I do like the way the game looks. It's got the wooden pieces and the beautiful map and the really neat box art. Even the box shape and color scheme kind of makes it stand out on the shelf. It just has some charm to it, and I do appreciate what the designer was going for. I mean, it's a very interesting concept and a unique game. It's really not like any other game I've ever played, and that makes it a perfect candidate to feature on my channel. So bear with me, this was a very difficult video to put together. I even had to speed up my voice when we get to the tutorial because there's so much going on in this game. Mix these action tiles face down and create some stacks there, and then mix the hourglass tiles and place them near the hourglass. Place the gray pawn on the magic hat space, and then you're going to place 4 sand timer cubes on the sand timer, the gray cubes. Then you're going to place 7, which is always 3 more than the cubes. 7 of these action tiles come out. This is all to start the game. I'll go over these action tiles later. But first, you're going to mix up these circular region tiles and flip one over onto each region randomly. This will seed the board slightly differently every game and make every game a bit different. All the remaining circles you're just going to place up near the board somewhere. Get those out of the way. Place the orange and white pawns on the 0 victory point track. Decide which player is orange and white and give each player 3 starting pieces of each type. So 3 discs and 3 cubes to each player. Now let's learn how to play this game. Again, I just tried to do my best. This was a very difficult tutorial to make. Power and Weakness is played in cycles. We have a magic cycle and then we have a sword cycle, and it's going to go back and forth throughout the game. We keep track of which cycle we're in with this little gray pawn here. Starting out the game, we're always in the magic cycle. Now, the cycle will end after all of these cubes come off of the sand timer. We start the game with 4 cubes, but each round that's going to be a little different because we're going to flip over one of these tiles, and that will determine how many cubes get placed on the sand timer at the beginning of each cycle. So as players take their actions, these cubes will come off of the timer, and as soon as the last cube is removed, the action will be finished out, and then we will do scoring. Every time the cubes run out, that triggers the end of a cycle. Then we switch that little marker down to the other cycle, and we go again. Now, the reason these cycles are important is twofold. First of all, they determine which pieces are considered active pieces. So notice here next to each cycle, we have the discs and the cubes. The discs are active during the magic phase, and discs are called magicians. Each player has magicians, these little discs. And then when we switch to the sword phase, your cubes become active, and those are called knights. So each player has magicians and knights. Depending on which cycle you are in will determine which pieces are active and which pieces are passive. The second reason the cycle is important is what's called neighboring rules. We have slightly different neighboring rules depending on which cycle we're in. And what neighboring rules refer to is which regions on the board are considered adjacent to each other or neighboring. During the sword phase, it's very standard. It's just if they share a border, it's considered neighboring. So because the knights are active during the sword phase, you think of the knights, they just walk across the land, so they can't do anything special. It's just this is neighboring this is neighboring this is neighboring this, and so on. So it's a standard adjacent type of a map. However, when we are in the magic phase, the magicians have special powers, and they can sort of teleport, I guess, from one region to the next. And that's where we look at these circular tiles. So all the matching tiles are considered neighboring, but only when we're in the magic phase. So if we were in the magic phase, like all these castle regions would be considered neighboring or adjacent. Same with all the green key regions. Those would all be considered neighboring. So you just have to remember when you're in the phase with the discs, the magicians, you look at the discs out here to determine what is neighboring. Another concept to learn is stock versus reserves. The stock is just like your general supply of pieces. The reserves are down here. These are what you are actually allowed to put onto the map. So you can never put pieces from your stock directly onto the map. You first have to recruit them into your reserves, then you can use them on the map. If you've ever played Andreas Steding's Hansa Teutonica or some of his other games, he uses this mechanism quite a bit where you have like a general supply that you cannot use. You first have to get them into your possession, then you can use them in the game. So just keep in mind, you're going to keep these pieces separated. You start the game with 3 of each in your reserves ready to use. The final critical definition to learn in this game is what is considered an active region. Now, we talked about active and passive pieces, but what determines an active region? An active region is a region that has more active pieces than passive pieces. So in this example, if we are in the magic cycle, discs are the active piece. So this region would be considered an active region because it has more active pieces than passive pieces. However, if we only had 1 of each, this would not be an active region because we do not have more active pieces than passive pieces. If we had it like this would also be not an active region. However, if we were in the sword phase, now this becomes an active region because we have more active pieces. The cubes are now active. We have more active pieces than passive pieces. It's also important to note in this game, this is purely area control. So 2 players are never going to be able to be in the same region. You're going to be taking over each other's region. So you should never see, orange and white within the same region. There's only going to be 1 player in a region. Active regions are important because at the end of each cycle, once these cubes run out, whoever controls more active regions at that moment is going to get 1 victory point. And this is one way to score points in the game. You want to control more active regions than your opponent when those cubes run off the timer there. Now let's talk about the general game flow, the gameplay. So what do you do at the beginning of a cycle? First of all, each player is going to take 2 active pieces from the stock into their reserves. So we do that right now. And remember, it's active pieces. So we're in the magic phase. Discs are now active. So each player starts by taking 2 discs. The next thing we would normally do is flip over one of these hourglass tiles, and that would tell us how many cubes to put onto the hourglass for that cycle. It just so happens we always start the game with 4 cubes, so we don't have to do that right now. But normally we would flip that over, put cubes onto there, and then we would flip over action tiles equal to the number of cubes plus 3. So we start the game with 4 plus 3, 7 action tiles. After we do that, we begin the gameplay. Starting with the start player, we'll take turns. Each player gets 2 actions. You can choose to do the same action twice, or you can choose 2 different actions. There's 4 total possibilities for what you can do as an action. Now, who goes first? Well, whoever has the fewest victory points at the beginning of the cycle gets to go first. If you have a tie for victory points, it's whoever controls fewest active regions. And again, we talked about what makes a region active. If there's still a tie, then you randomly determine the start player, which is the case at the beginning of the game. We're tied for everything. So let's just say the white player is going to go first. Now, if there's a tie for victory points, the first player gets 1 fewer action, but just on their first turn. So remember I said each player gets 2 actions. Well, starting out, the first player is only going to get 1 action. Then this player would get 2 actions, and then this player would get 2 actions, and so on, until these cubes run off the timer. So the start player has a choice of 4 possible actions. Let's learn what those 4 options are, because they're pretty easy. Option number 1, this is 1 action you can take. Simply take 1 of the available action tiles into your possession. That's 1 action. If you wanted to take 2 tiles, that would be 2 actions. The second option for an action you can take on your turn is placing 1 active piece onto the map. So remember, we have to look at which cycle we are in to determine what pieces are active. So in this example, this player could place 1 disc and go into any region that's open or any region which they already have a piece. So like if they had a piece out there already, they could place a disc into that region, or they could place a disc in any open region. If orange was somewhere, though, they could not place a piece where their opponent is located. The next option is recruiting, and this is how you get more pieces from your stock into your supply. You can take 2 passive pieces from the stock into your reserve. So in this case, cubes are passive because we're not in this cycle. We're in the magic cycle, so cubes are passive. So if you did a recruit action, you would take 2 cubes from the stock into your reserve. Now it's important to note, the first player to choose that action gets a bonus. They get 1 extra. So if this player was the first to do the recruit action during this cycle, they would actually take 3 passive pieces, and then it would be 2 from that point on until the cycle ends. The final option for an action you can take is using your action tiles. Remember, it takes an action to get tile into your possession, but when you use action tiles, you can use as many of these tiles as you have for 1 action. So that's kind of a way you could build up several of these and then unleash a big turn later. So that's your 4 options. You have take a tile, place a piece, recruit, or use your action tiles. Pretty simple. Once a player takes 2 actions, then this player gets 2 actions, and you go back and forth. Certain actions cause cubes to come off the sand timer, so let's talk about that real quick. There's 2 of the 4 actions use cubes on the sand timer. Anytime you recruit, so moving pieces from here to here, you're going to remove 1 cube off the sand timer. Anytime you use action tiles, you also will take a cube off the sand timer per action tile that you use. Remember, you can use multiple tiles that you have for 1 action, but every time you use one, you have to take a cube off. So you might not be able to use all the tiles you want to because you're limited. As soon as these cubes run out, the cycle ends. So keep that in mind. So anytime you recruit or use action tiles, you're going to be removing cubes from the sand timer. However, if you're just placing a piece on the board, or if you're just taking an action tile, you do not remove cubes from the sand timer. So that's your options for actions. Again, each player gets 2 actions, except when there's a tie for victory points at the beginning, the start player gets 1 fewer just for that first turn. Then it's 2, 2, 2, and 2, and so on, until that last cube comes off. And when that last cube comes off, you finish the action that you're on, and that ends the cycle immediately. Now, let's say we're at the end of the cycle, all these cubes got removed. Whenever the cycle ends, you do a scoring. Whoever controls more active regions. Again, an active region is a region with more active pieces than passive pieces. Whichever player controls more active regions gets 1 point. And if there's a tie, both players get 1 point, and you track that up there. Then you determine this number plus the number of active regions they control. That is their current score. And if that number ever hits 12, the game ends and that player wins. So you just have to remember at the end of the cycle, you're going to give a point to whoever has more active regions, and then you're going to add whatever their score is up here to the current number of active regions. That is their score. That is when you end the game if they hit 12 points. So you're not necessarily going to move this pawn all the way up to 12. It's this number plus active regions controlled at that time. So that's another little tricky thing to get your head around. And I'll show you more how scoring works, but let's kind of fill up the board. We'll do some sample turns here, and you can see how this game progresses a little bit. And then I will teach you what all these action tiles mean in a little bit, but let's get the board sort of populated here. So let's say it's the white player's turn to go first. Normally they would get their 2 actions, but they only get 1 action because both players are tied for victory points. So this player decides they're going to use the recruit action. So they're going to take 2 passive pieces from the stock into their reserves. Now remember, if they're the first player during this cycle, if they're the first player to use the recruit action, they get a bonus piece. So they actually get to take 3 pieces instead of 2. From now on during this cycle, anybody who recruits only gets 2 pieces. Now since they did the recruit action, 1 cube comes off the timer right now. Then it becomes the orange player's turn. Let's say they want to take 1 tile. So they're going to take a tile, that's 1 action. And then they're going to place 1 active piece onto the board. Let's say they go here. Again, I'm just going to blaze through this. I don't know if these are the best strategies or not, but I just want to show you how this game might progress. Now this player, the white player, gets 2 actions. They want to also place a piece. Let's say they place a piece maybe up here, an active piece. There's 1, and they're going to place another active piece. Now they could go here just to kind of shore up their presence there, or they could jump over here. So they're going to do that. That's their turn. Now it's the orange player's turn. Now the orange player is going to take 1 more action tile here. It's 1 action. and they're going to place another piece, and they want to just have more presence in this region. This player here is going to recruit once again, so they're going to take 2 this time. Again, you take the passive pieces, and that removes one of the sand timer cubes. So that's their first action. Their next action, they are going to take a tile. I'll put that there so we can see them. Now it's the orange player's turn. Orange player is also going to recruit. They're going to take 2 passive pieces, and that removes the timer. And they're also going to place one more piece onto the board, and they're going to jump in and go here, let's say. Okay? Now it's the white turn. White is going to go ahead and rush the end of the round here. So they're going to place an active piece right here, and then they're going to recruit. And by recruiting, they're essentially going to end the cycle because this cube has to come off since they took the recruit action. And now we do a scoring because the cycle has ended. First, we check who has more active regions. White has 3, and orange only has 2 active regions. Therefore, white has more, white gets 1 point. You always give 1 point to whoever has more active regions. If both players tie for active regions, they both get 1 point. Now you have to remember to check. This is a part that's easily forgotten and kind of easily misunderstood the way it's written in the rule book. You must add this number to the number of active regions that you control. So white would add 1 point plus 3 points for a total of 4. If that number is 12, they win the game. That's how you win this. You have to get 12 points by adding this number to the number of active regions at that moment. So orange right now would only have 0 plus 2. So orange would have 2, white would have 4 at this moment. You just have to remember, you always check to see if a player has reached 12 using that method that I just showed you. Since nobody has reached 12 yet, we're going to start a new cycle. So to start a new cycle, this is going to shift down. Now we're in the sword cycle. Each player gets 2 active pieces, which are now the cubes. Those come into their reserves. And also, we're going to flip over this hourglass tile, and this will determine how many cubes go onto the hourglass for this cycle. So we're going to do 6. Now we wipe off any unused action tiles from over here, and we draw all new ones. Now remember, we always draw 3 more action tiles than cubes. So we're going to draw 9 new action tiles for this cycle. So I'm going to do this here. Now we're all set up to start. Now this is another thing to remember. Whoever has fewer points on this track gets to go first. So orange gets to go first. They're going to take their 2 actions. Now I'm going to rush through just so you can see the board sort of fill up. And then I want to really discuss these action tiles because that's where the heart of the game is in carrying out these actions, maneuvering your pieces, attacking your opponents, and things like that. Okay, we have fast forwarded the game here. It's a little bit later. There's more pieces on the board. Now I want to teach you about these action tiles. These will really help you visualize this game a little better. So the first action tiles, I'm just going to go over these one by one, but the first ones to learn are these 3 because they have a lightning bolt symbol at the top. What the lightning bolt symbol means is these tiles actually get auctioned off. You do a blind bid, and the winner gets to activate this tile immediately. So again, these are going to be up here just like these, and whoever takes this, that counts as an action, but then immediately the game is paused and an auction happens. Once the auction happens, the highest bidder gets to play this tile immediately, and by playing it, they don't use up another action. They do, however, have to remove a cube from the sand timer because it counts as an action tile being played, but it doesn't count as an action. The winner of this tile gets to immediately replace one of the circles out there with one of the leftover circles from setup. So you would just look through these and they could swap out any region, whether they control it or not. So that can really change the game there. The next one here is very simple. It's just a point. So the winner of that auction gets to move up 1 point. The last one is called Rebellion, and this is a brutal, brutal tile. The winner of this tile gets to remove 2 of their opponent's pieces from one single region. So they get to pick any 2 pieces from a single region, wipe them off the board, and they go back to that player's stock. They can be passive or active pieces. It doesn't matter. Any 2 pieces. So how does the auction work? Well, it's very simple. As soon as somebody takes a lightning bolt tile, each player takes all their pieces that are active from their reserves, and then they secretly bid a certain number of those for the auction. So both players will have a secret number of active pieces, reveal those, and the winner pays those back to their stock. So they lose those, but then they win the tile. And then they carry out the action on the tile. The other player gets to keep their cubes or whatever in their reserve, so they don't lose them if you lose the auction. If both players bid the same, the tile gets discarded and both players keep their pieces that they bid with. However, a sand timer cube still comes off because it still counts as a tile being played for some reason. So you just have to remember some of those rules can be a little bit wonky, but basically anytime you see a lightning bolt, there's going to be a blind bid auction of active pieces. The winner gets the tile and they get to carry that out immediately. And don't forget to remove a cube from the sand timer when you do that. The next tiles to learn are the movement tiles. These are very simple. So we have a ship and then we have this little symbol here. I will also note, anytime you see a tile with pieces shown at the bottom, there's several of these. That means this tile can either be used for the movement, the regular action, or instead as a recruitment action. So if you don't want to use the ship action, you can just spend this and get 2 discs. So it's just like a free recruiting, or just get 2 cubes with this one. And there's some other ones too, like this snake one here. You could just spend this and get, either 2 cubes or 2 discs. So you don't have to use it for the action. You can instead use these to just recruit more pieces, and that can come in handy as well. But let's learn what the actions do. The ship action here is ocean or sea movement. This is very easy. When you play this, you can move all or some of your pieces from one region to another region as long as they're both coastal regions. So you could not move pieces that were on these landlocked regions, but any of the outer regions that you control, you could take all your pieces or some of them and move them to another outer region as long as you control it or it's empty. So you cannot invade other players, like orange here, could move these 2 discs to, say, this region here and just like shore up that region. But they could not enter a region with their opponent. This is one way to move in the game, is with ships. The other way to move is this one here. This tile lets you swap pieces in 2 neighboring regions. So once again, neighboring regions is important to know depending on which cycle you are in. If we're in the night phase here, you can rearrange pieces that are adjacent. So orange player could, move 2 of these up to here and then move the cube down to here. However you want to do that, you pick 2 regions that are considered neighboring and you can rearrange your pieces. If we happen to be in the magic phase, again, you have to remember which regions are neighboring. So then you could swap pieces like this tent piece here. You could swap these pieces with this region up here because tents would be adjacent if we were in the magic phase. Again, very important to understand neighboring rules as we discussed earlier. So these are the only 2 tiles that let you really move pieces. This one lets you swap pieces within 2 neighboring regions. And this one lets you move pieces from one coastal region to another coastal region. The next piece to learn is the snake. This is a defensive tile. You can play this, again, you can play it just to recruit pieces, or you can play this when an opponent is going to play like an attack or any action tile. You can spend this to prevent them from using that action tile. So they would play a tile and then you would play the snake. Now it's worth noting, every time you play a tile, a cube has to come off. So if that player plays a tile and it's the last cube, then you cannot play the snake because there's no cubes left on the timer. So there have to be 2 cubes available. Your opponent plays a tile, then you play the snake to prevent them from doing that tile. And then those just get discarded. This is the only tile that you can play on your opponent's turn. Let's learn about these influence tiles. These are the most important and most used action tiles in the game. So there's influence tiles based on all 4 of the symbols that are out there. Your tents and your castles and your keys, and there's, your armor. So whatever tile is played, it corresponds to those regions that match the symbol. When you play one of these influence tiles, you can do one of 2 things. You can either reinforce or you can take over or attack an opponent. If you reinforce, you basically just take a piece, an active piece from your reserves, and add it to one of your regions that you control that matches that symbol. So if I played this tile, I could simply take a cube and add it to a region that I control that matches that symbol. So I could put a cube there. Now you might be thinking, well, that's the same as just placing a piece, right? Well, here's where it differs. First of all, when you play these, remember, you can play multiple action tiles for a single action. So if you had like multiples of these, you could place multiple pieces on the board for one action. Your other way to do that where you just place a piece, that uses up a single action per piece you place. You could save up a bunch of these tiles and then place a bunch of pieces out on the board for a single action. The other reason you would want to use these to place pieces, normally when you place a piece, the limit is 4 pieces in a region. So if this region was maxed out at 4, I could not use the place a piece action to add another cube here because it's maxed out. Once it hits 4, you cannot add more by placing a piece, but you can add more by playing one of these tiles as reinforcements. So you could play this castle tile and add an active piece to a castle region, even if it's maxed out at 4. So that's another reason you would want to do that. Now remember, I said you could play this to reinforce your own area or to attack an opponent's area. So let's say they want to attack an opponent's castle. So this opponent controls this castle region and it matches the tile that they play. When you attack, you look at active pieces in neighboring regions. Active pieces right now are cubes. So my strength is any cube that is bordering the region I'm attacking. So my strength right now is 1, 2, 3, 4. My opponent's strength is the same thing, plus they get to count all their pieces within the region I'm attacking. So active pieces neighboring plus all their pieces within the region that is contested. So if I was to attack this, their strength would be 1, 2, then you count the cubes neighboring it, so 3 and 4. So they're tied with me right now. If a tie happens, you can't even do this. You can only play this if you can successfully overtake them. So if I had, 1 extra cube out here and then I attacked, now my strength would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And my opponent's strength would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So we only count active pieces in the neighboring regions and all their pieces in the contested region. So in this case, orange would win. And when orange wins, they would take an active piece, and it has to be from their reserve. So I would have had to have this cube already in my reserve and place it, and I now take over that region. Meanwhile, my opponent is allowed to scatter 1 piece to a neighboring region. So they could pick one of these pieces to scatter either here or here. And they might do this. The other piece goes back into their stock. It's called a takeover. That's how a takeover works in this game. So that's another reason you want to play these tiles, is to take over your opponents. The magic phase, it works the same way, except now you just have to remember which regions are considered neighboring. So if I was to attack a castle region now, you would get to add all the pieces that are in the yellow castle regions toward your attack strength or your defense. So you just have to kind of wrap your head around which cycle you're in when that happens. The Merlin action tile lets you either, you could use the bottom section to recruit 2 or 2, or you can use the top section, and he's just a wild of any of these influence tiles. This is confusing because they made them circular instead of squares, but he acts as a square of any of the regions. So that's a very powerful one. Plus, you can use him to recruit. So the Merlin tile, I think there might only be one of these in the whole stack. And the final action tile to note are these, and these all work the same way too. These just add 1 to your strength for the entire cycle. So you still have to play this tile and remove a cube from the sand timer, but when you play this, for the rest of the cycle, you have +1 in all the castle regions. You would have +1, and that counts whether you are the attacker or whether your opponent is attacking you. So it just adds 1 to your presence in all those regions for this round, and that is a very, very important tile as well. All these action tiles are very good, and that's what makes this game cool, is really getting your head around how these work, when to use them, when to take which ones. And again, you can even use these, we use this a lot, just using the bottom half of this and just using it as a recruit. Because remember, when you do the regular recruit, you cannot take active pieces. Sometimes you run out of active pieces and you need more. These tiles are nice because you can use them either for the movement or to recruit new pieces. So a lot of flexibility exists in these action tiles, and it makes for a very different game every time you play this. I mean, you're going to have, a different setup of these circular tokens every time, and you're going to have a different assortment of action tiles every time. Okay, well, now that you know how to play the game, I hope that gives you some idea. I rate this game a 7.5 out of 10. That means, it's not my favorite game. I do appreciate the game design. It's got some very interesting and crunchy decisions throughout. It also fills a niche of two-player area control. There's just not a lot of those out there. So this one stays in my collection for sure. I just have to be in the mood to play this. It is definitely a tough game to grasp at first. I mean, it took me about 3 plays to really even understand, what was going on in the game. It's just hard to visualize how those neighboring rules change and then affect the gameplay and what you should and shouldn't be doing. The action tiles are a big part of the game, and that doesn't become apparent until you really grasp this. I will say that shifting cycle idea is brilliant. That's my favorite part of the game. When you go from the magic cycle into the sword cycle and back again, that allows for some interesting and clever gameplay. What you can do is sort of hide your motives behind those shifting cycles. It almost mimics the fog of war a little bit, and it's really cool because, you can see what the other player is doing. You can look at all their pieces that they're building up and sort of have an idea of what their plan of attack is. However, you can't be quite sure if they're building up for the sword phase or the magic phase. It keeps you guessing if both players are equally skilled and really into the game and understand the game. My biggest complaint with the game is just those little fiddly rules that are hard to remember to do. For instance, if both players are tied for victory points, then the start player only gets 1 action on their first turn and then 2 after that. I don't know how necessary that really is. I'm not a game designer. I'm sure there's a reason behind that rule, but I just think the game could be streamlined. For instance, the victory condition is extremely hard to grasp. At the end of every cycle, you have to figure out first who has more active regions, and even that is a little tricky to figure out once you get more and more pieces on the board. Then you have to give that person a point. Then you have to look at the victory point track and add those points to your current active regions to get your total score. And if that number is 12, then you win the game. I mean, that has to be one of the most over-the-top victory conditions that I've ever come across in a board game. It's just really hard to remember how to do that the first few plays, and it's really hard to teach it to a new player, that's for sure. So I feel like there could be an easier way to calculate points in this game and things like that. I don't know. That's my biggest complaint. Rules that make you wonder if you played it right and make you have to second guess if your score was legit at the end. It's like, oh, did we remember to only take 1 action that one time that we were tied? I don't know. And then you question if the result was even real or not. So I don't like that in a board game. I want to be 100% certain that I'm playing it properly. I would love to see this game revamped a little bit and streamlined using that, shifting market idea. I think that is a genius concept. How that changes the map throughout the game is so interesting to me, and that is the sweet spot of the game. So that's Power and Weakness. Have you ever played this? Let me know in the comments below. What's your favorite 2-player only area control game? There's not a lot to choose from out there, so I would love to hear about some of those and maybe do some more research, because I do love area control games, and I would like more opportunities to play those at 2 players. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you get more updates on undiscovered games just like this. And if you're on Instagram, stop by and say hello. I'm at undiscovered_games. I post a lot of written reviews and photos over there as well. So thanks again for watching, everybody. If you want to support the channel, there is a PayPal link in the description below. You can donate any amount you like, but the best way to support the channel is to like, subscribe, comment, and share this video with your board gaming friends. I'm so excited to have you on this journey with me as we discover the undiscovered board games of the world together on this channel right here. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and we will see you on the next video.